Good morning and welcome to Orkney International Science Festival online. My name is Matt Vidmar and it is my pleasure to be introducing the John D. Mackay Memorial Lecture. John D. Mackay, headmaster of Sunday School, was a scholar who loved to open up new ideas at the frontiers of knowledge for the whole community. And the festival remembers him each year with a lecture, opening new horizons. Today, we are looking across a very fundamental horizon of the nature of life in the universe. Is life really unique to the Earth and found nowhere else, or is it ubiquitous across the galaxy and wider? It is my absolute honor and privilege to introduce a man perhaps best placed to offer some answers. Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe, a world-renowned astronomer, astrophysicist, and pioneer of astrobiology. He was a former fellow of Jesus College, Cambridge, and a founder member of the Institute of Astronomy. From 1973 to 2010, he was a professor at Cardiff University and now holds honorary professorships at several universities worldwide and continues to publish books and papers. In 1977, together with the late Sir Fred Hoyle, he proposed the theory of cometary panspermia, the idea that life is widespread, dispersed in cosmic dust and gas clouds, and spreads to planets by comets and meteorites. Discoveries in astronomy and geology continue to provide evidence in support of the theory. So why is it that the theory is not yet widely accepted in physics and biology? The reason, argues Professor Wickramasinghe, now an honorary professor at the University of Buckingham, is connected with cultural issues more than it is with science. As always, after the talk there'll be time for questions, which can be sent in from any time in the live chat on YouTube. But for now, we are all delighted to have you with us, and it's all over to you, Professor Chandra.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here again, even virtually. I remember my last visit to you several years ago, and the reception I had from all your colleagues there was really memorable. So it's great to be at the Orkney Science Festival again and to talk about the progress of a theory that I have been involved in for nearly 4 decades. The title of my talk is Life's Cosmic Prevalence, and that means to say life as was mentioned in the introduction, life everywhere, life in the form of viruses and bacteria, not confined to the Earth, but distributed everywhere throughout the universe. Sadly, this idea has been rather distanced in terms of publicity in the mainstream media for a long time. And as was told in the introduction, I believe that the reason for this is purely cultural, not to do with any of the facts that were really quite strongly in favor of the theory that life is everywhere. So this is an interesting development that happened in the last day, I think, couple of days. Viruses may exist everywhere in the universe, warns scientists, and this has made headlines everywhere in the New Scientist, in the Guardian, and so on. And the guy that has been attributed to these ideas is a strange person, so-called Professor Paul Davies. Now, I've known him for a long time, and I don't regard his contribution in this area as being at all significant. But what he has said seems to have grabbed the headlines, and that's perhaps as good as you can get. Now, the fact remains that, if you see my next slide, the fact remains that my own priorities and my priorities together with Sir Fred Hoyle on the idea that life is everywhere, bacteria and viruses form a connected cosmic microbiome, that goes back, as I said, nearly 4 decades, and we've published books from the 1980s. So our priority is absolutely clear. Today, we take it for granted that science always leads to absolute truths about the world around us. This is true in many instances, in the many remarkable discoveries of natural phenomena and processes that have been achieved over the past decades and centuries. And to name just about a few of these, the circulation of blood, for instance, the germ theory of disease, the evolution of life as a mechanism, the fact that life is not stationary in its progress, that it evolves from simple to complex organisms, that is a fact. The DNA, the genetic material in our cells being the source of our inheritance, that is a fact. And of course, most importantly in astronomy, the laws of gravity that control the motions of planets and stars and galaxies, that is also an absolute fact. But there are issues that are far from secure, and consensus views on much bigger issues are to be questioned at the present time. And this, of course, involves the origin of the universe. We think that there was a unique origin. Most of us think that the unique origin 13.8 billion years ago with the Big Bang, but that has been called to question. Roger Penrose, amongst others, have asked the question, what happened before that? And that's a very pertinent question. And in relation to my talk today, the question of the origin of life, how did life in the universe begin? So cultural imperialism and cultural constraints have controlled the progress of science in the past. And that's absolutely obvious when you look at the history of science. The very interesting example, I think, amusing example perhaps, is the numeral system that we all use in our arithmetic and mathematics and so on, 0, 1, 2, 3, negative numbers and so on. It's called the Hindu Arabic number system that originated in India thousands of years ago. And that was very difficult to replace in Europe. It was very difficult to replace the European Roman numeral system that had been used until the Middle Ages, and this so-called alien Hindu Arabic number system was rejected, fiercely rejected until the late 16th century, and for reasons that are purely cultural. So that's the situation that we have in terms of general distribution between facts and hypotheses and tentative statements about the universe. We know as a definite fact that the Earth is an ordinary planet. There's nothing very special about it. It's a terrestrial planet with an atmosphere and a rocky surface orbiting a quite ordinary star, which is the sun. And since 2009, we also know that there are probably, and almost certainly, I think, in excess of 140 billion similar planets in the entire galaxy. We also know as a fact that our planet is connected, intimately, physically connected with the external universe. In fact, it receives hundreds of tons of cometary and meteoric dust and debris every single day. So against the connection with the external universe, of course, was highlighted in the last few years when we had, in September 2019, which is the most recent hyperbolic comet Borisov, came from the depths of interstellar space, came into the solar system, almost certainly dispersed material in the inner solar system, and then went away. And this was not the first of these comets, of course. Then we had a couple of years earlier, the comet Oumuamua, which was also in the same situation. Came close to the Milky, to the center of our solar system, and it went away. Today, we know that comets can transport, can bring into the solar system, bring in even into the Earth's vicinity, lots of material, organic material, and as I shall argue later in this talk, even viable microorganisms might be brought in from outside. And we know that near-Earth asteroids, including some that can possibly in the future collide with the Earth, have the potential of being transporters of microbiota. These two, Ryugu and Bennu, have been studied in the last couple of years, and the recent studies have revealed amazing new insights into these near-Earth objects. They are found to be highly, extremely porous, carbonaceous, and replete with heat-producing elements, which means that in the past, these objects would have been watery, liquid water domains that could certainly have been the homes of microbial life, habitats of microbial life. Against such a backdrop, I ask the question, is it even remotely possible that the Earth is the only home of life, the only home of biology in the entire universe? And moreover, that the Earth can be regarded as being disconnected, physically and biologically disconnected from the wider cosmos. Yet this is exactly what counts today in 2021 as conventional wisdom, with a few dissenters, as I pointed out, emerging in the last couple of weeks. In the 3rd century BC, Aristotle made two really far-reaching assertions about the world around us. The first assertion was that the Earth is the absolute physical center of the universe. And the second assertion was that life, biology, arose spontaneously from non-living matter here on the Earth. The idea of fireflies emerging from a mixture of warm earth and morning dew is very familiar to most of us. So dismantling these wrong ideas of Aristotle essentially has been a big problem and has defined, I should say, the trajectory of Western science for over 2,000 years. So this is the history that we have to combat at the moment. And I hate to bring religion into this, but it is unfortunately a fact that theological support, particularly Christian, Catholic theological support for the entire corpus of Aristotelian philosophy was taken up by the great theologian and Saint Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century, 13th century of the Common Era. And so after that, it is unfortunately the case that papal decrees ruled our opinions about the universe. And so after that, it became clear that the most important questions of our origins, of our existence, of our evolution became inextricably and intimately connected with theology and religious culture. So these are facts, like it or not, they are facts that have to be faced. Overturning Aristotle's Earth-centered cosmology, we are all aware of that. We've learned about the Copernican revolution in schools and universities and so on. And the first Copernican revolution, which was to remove the Earth from the physical center of the world, started in sort of 15th century and stretched over nearly 150 years. It went through Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and finally Newton until it was rejected and displaced. Overturning Aristotle's second proposition is much more difficult in terms of what has transpired. It has become deeply intertwined, as I said, first with religion and later with a burgeoning Eurocentric scientific culture. It became intertwined with European science and European culture. But the evidence from empirical science has been consistent right throughout. There's no question about that. Pasteur was the key scientist who started the whole business of challenging spontaneous generation. He showed, for instance, that the fermentation of wine and the souring of milk were processes that required microorganisms and did not occur if there were no microorganisms. So he made this famous pronouncement, omne vivum ex vivo, meaning for those Latin scholars amongst your audience, it translates to say, all life comes from life. So that was Pasteur, and Pasteur, of course, had many, many supporters who essentially followed Pasteur's challenge of Aristotelian philosophy. But that, in fact, Pasteur's rejection of spontaneous generation reopened an even earlier idea, much earlier idea, known as Panspermia. And this idea, Panspermia, predates Aristotle by a couple of centuries. And it goes back to, as far as Western record goes, it goes back to Anaxagoras, a pre-Socratic philosopher, Greek philosopher, who had proposed that living seeds, which he calls spermata, are distributed everywhere throughout the cosmos. And this basic concept, of course, has even older roots in non-European culture, in the Vedic traditions of India, for example, that date back perhaps to the 1000 BCE. So its revival in the modern era can be seen as antithetical to European scientific culture. And that's the problem that we face. Pasteur's revival of panspermia, of course, received the plaudits of many perceptive, highly intelligent physicists of the day. Hermann von Helmholtz, the great physicist of the European physicists, was amongst them. And he said that, this is an interesting quote, "It appears to me to be a fully correct scientific procedure if all our attempts fail to cause the production of organisms from non-living matter, to raise the question whether life has ever arisen, whether it is not just as old as matter itself, and whether seeds have not been carried from one planet to another." So this is a very powerful argument, but as powerful as the argument was, Aristotelian spontaneous generation died really hard, and it re-emerged in a different guise in the form of the Earth-centered theory of the primordial soup, the theory, modern theory that's called abiogenesis. This is life emerging from a mixture of just organic chemicals, just lifeless inorganic organic chemicals, and on the Earth, starting on the Earth, and beating insuperable odds, super astronomical odds. After 7 decades of high-tech laboratory work devoted to this goal, trying to prove abiogenesis, abiogenesis has really turned out to be a dismal failure, and still in 2021 remains an empty promise. So it's precisely because the probability hurdle to pass from organic molecules to the simplest living form is hugely impossible. It is indeed super astronomical. So the inescapable conclusion then, up to this point, is that life is either a miracle that happened on the Earth against incredible odds and will therefore never be repeated anywhere. And this is consistent with certain theologies, or certainly Augustine theologies, or alternatively, fully fledged genes, seeds of life, the information to make life in the form of bacteria and viruses are everywhere throughout the cosmos. And as Helmholtz said 100 years ago, they develop wherever they fall on fertile soil. So it is Fred, this is Fred and me in 1980, walking in Sri Lanka, as it turns out. We proposed in 1980 the theory of cometary panspermia that asserts life to be a cosmic phenomenon with its genetic components, all the bits and pieces that are needed to make life, informational units, being transported via the agency of comets to the Earth and to other similar planets. So let's look briefly at the history of life on our planet, on our lush green planet, which teems with life today. But this was not always the case. Life was not always here on the planet. We know that for sure. If you go back 4.54 billion years ago, we know that the Earth began to form as a result of collecting coalescence of material in a disk that was expelled from the newly formed sun, an equatorial disk. And this arrow points to that. 400 million years later, that is about 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was in the last stages of its accumulation, of its formation. A brisk rain of rocky asteroids defining its crust and surface fell on it. And at that time, of course, no life or even organic molecules could have conceivably existed or survived. We know also that that between 4.5 and 4 billion years ago, our newly formed planet was showered with cometary impacts. Comets were very frequently striking the Earth after its surface had cooled and become quiet, all the high temperatures that had gone down. And so these comets brought the water to form the Earth's oceans. We think that is almost certain, but it also brought other things, life itself. Recently, in 2015, it's been found that the very first, oldest evidence of microbial life on the Earth is actually locked inside crystals of zirconium that condensed 4.1 billion years ago. And these are now exposed in a rock formation known as the Jack Hills outcrop in Western Australia. So this puts the beginning of life on Earth to this time, precisely to 4.1, 4.2 billion years ago. And it was a time of intense bombardment by comets. And so in that context, I think we have to then go back to study, look more carefully at comets. Comets in this picture are both the amplifiers, the bringers of life, the amplifiers of life, and the distributors of life throughout the universe. And they were thus, for this reason, rightly respected, revered, even feared in many ancient cultures throughout the world. In 1982, after our idea of cometary panspermia was announced in scientific literature, in various journals and so on, we began to think of various tests that would verify the claim that comets were distributing living particles everywhere in the cosmos. In 1982, my brother, who was then a professor at the University of Canberra, Australian National University, and David Allen, used the Anglo-Australian telescope to show, to essentially verify a prediction of the biogenesis of cosmic dust. We had predicted that cosmic dust, if it was coming from comets, must have certain infrared signatures that can be identified as possibly life, and this is what we found. The points here in this figure are the astronomical observations of Dahl and Allen, and the curve was a prediction that we had made ahead of the astronomical observations, so what the observations should reveal if there was bacteria everywhere in the universe. And as you can see, the fit is absolutely marvelous, perfect, to a point that was almost unbelievable. Anyway, that's the situation that was around in 1981, 1986, was a comet, Halley's, had a similar prediction being verified. I'll come back to that a little more, I think, if I have time. But in 2021, evidence for biologically relevant molecules in space, everywhere in space, was absolutely secure. And so these molecules exist in planets and the solar system, interstellar clouds, and even in the most distant galaxies. So genetic building blocks of life, ready for assembly into life, are ubiquitous in the universe. That's the conclusion. The first evidence of bacteria-like dust coming out from comets emerged after the last perihelion passage of comet Halley during the space age, which was in 1986. And I want to rush through these slides because my time is running out. So fast forward to 28 years, there's more and more data that is consistent with. If you can hold, go a little slowly. Go a little slowly on that. Oh, you're running through this far too quickly. So fast forward 28 years, you have the Rosetta mission and a signature of bacteria showing up clearly, not generally acknowledged, but the signature is there. Methane discovered, very dark surface, and everything matched the properties of bacteria and viruses. So if you go on next slide, so in 2021, I summarized that there's no doubt that comets are in fact the carriers of life. And then the next question one has to ask is, what are the further implications of this knowledge, of this discovery? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. If comets brought the first life to Earth, as I indicated, 4.2 billion years ago, that process could not have stopped in the distant past. It must still continue. And we know that the comets are around the Earth, or cometary orbits the Earth is enmeshed in a sort of mess of cometary orbits, and the white curves are the comet or short period comets. The red circle is here. It's Earth's orbit, and it shows clearly that we are immersed in this debris that come from comets. So in collaboration, could the debris be shown to have living particles? In collaboration with the Indian Space Research Organization, Fred Hoyle and I, in 2001, were determined to conduct an experiment to collect infalling cometary dust in the stratosphere before it became mixed up with the Earth's contamination, with the Earth's environment. So the collection involved evacuated stainless steel sterilized cylinders, like what you have on the right-hand side, those tubes. And it's like the sort of Calagas cylinders that you use for camping, right? And these were sterilized, they were sealed, vacuumed, sealed, and opened on remote control. And the next slide shows what happened when there's a valve open, the stratospheric air rushes in, and if there's any bacteria or aerosols in the stratospheric air, it rushes in to fill the vacuum, and the cylinder and contents are then parachuted back to the ground to be examined in the laboratory. And what we found is that the air from 41 kilometers contained a huge amount of bacteria that could not have come from the ground, absolutely impossible to have come from the ground. There are clumps of bacteria, cocci and a bacillus there in the first picture there, and viable, although not culturable microorganisms also indicated by the use of fluorescent dyes. From the sampling of this material in 2001 and in later years, it can be estimated that something like 0.3 to 3 tons of bacterial and viral material falls through the stratosphere, through the atmosphere every single day. And that 0.3 to 3 tons per day amounts to 20 to 200 million individual bacteria per square centimeter per day falling across the whole Earth. And this flux of material, of biological material, will surely normally go unnoticed because it will be mixed up with the terrestrial muck, with the terrestrial biology, but we cannot afford to ignore this quantity of infalling material. In 2018, even more compelling evidence for the ongoing entry of microbes was discovered by the Russians using the International Space Station, which is now at a height of 400 kilometers. And what they found was that outside the outside window of the International Space Station, which was swabbed 6 times between 2010 and 2016, showed the existence of microorganisms. And the height 400 kilometers, as I said, is far too lofty for microbes to be carried from the ground. So there's no doubt that these microbes came from space and are continuing to fall from space to the Earth. So recent discoveries of microbiology, a variety of discoveries, and these discoveries in epidemiology also. And I want to just touch briefly on that before, even at the risk of going over 5 minutes, because epidemiology is crucial to our thinking now with the raging of the coronavirus epidemic. So what we found is that not only bacteria and viruses, in the last few years, we found that even tardigrades have been sent to space and found to survive. And if you can go to the next slide. Oh, this is important. Viruses in various forms, including retroviruses, viruses that have essentially got into our genes or have the capacity to get into our genes. These hold a clue to our origins and to our cosmic ancestry. On the Earth, 10 million viruses have recently been counted in a single drop of ocean water. And because these viruses degrade on a very short time scale, in the blink of an eye, they must be falling into the oceans from space, from the skies. Viruses are the most efficient transmitters of genes between species on the Earth. And that's not anything that I've invented. It's well documented. By extrapolation, they can also transmit and store genetic information across the cosmos. Fred and I made this prediction as far back as 1981, and I think I would like to pause to even to go a couple of minutes in excess of my time to just talk a little bit about this. We said that if viruses are incident from space, then evolution must also be driven from space. Viruses do not always attack the cells they enter, while a particle may add itself placidly to one or other of the chromosomes. So viruses in our genes provide the potential for the emergence of new life forms. And that is the mechanism of evolution that we discussed. How could cosmic viruses interact so intimately with life forms on Earth is the question. And the answers are, or the possible answers are, both evolved symbiotically on the Earth, or both evolved in a vast interconnected cosmic biosphere or a cosmic microbiome. And that's the story that is getting a lot of airing at the present day in the last few days. So virus and evolution must then have a truly cosmic origin, being connected. Answers have come from the new science of genome sequencing, new since the dawn of the millennium. In 2001, the human genome came to be fully sequenced, and thereafter, the DNA of all our organisms on the Earth, and all present, and as well as fossil organisms, came to be sequenced. The human DNA has shown, this is a pie chart of the human DNA, shows that 5% of the human genome is made of relic viruses, or viruses that attacked us in the past. So relics of pandemics in the form of ERVs and HERVs show up clearly throughout our ancestral lineage. The evolution of humans over a million years was marked by a succession of pandemics that were, each of these pandemics was a near close call to the total extinction of this evolving line, but we came through. Primary evolution tree marks these little branching points, marks the points at which these viruses or relic viruses were inserted. So in 1979, we argued that pandemics throughout history were caused by RNA, DNA, virions from comets. And the strongest evidence from an ongoing space incidents may be for the case of influenza, as we have discussed many, many times in our writings over the past 4 decades. And now, rather strikingly also, for the currently raging pandemic of COVID-19. I had intended to talk a little bit more, but if you can quickly zip through these slides. We discussed Eton College in 1977. We found that the distribution of cases from house to house, boarding house to boarding house, displayed a pattern that required the mystery of an unproven super spreader, concept of a super spreader, which is being also deployed in the case of the present COVID-19 outbreak. The summary of this process of cometary viruses causing pandemics. Cometary virus comes in from space, enters the stratosphere, like what we discovered in 2001. It comes down with winter downdraft in the rain into the troposphere, raindrops condensing around viruses, reaches the ground, mists caused by the evaporation of raindrops and enters the human respiratory tract. So that's the process. Reservoir virus introduced to the top of the atmosphere, small particles suspended in the stratosphere for a decade or more because they last a long time, pulled down whenever the upper and lower atmospheres, makes seasonal process connected with winter downdraft. So that's the pattern of influenza that has been repeated time and time again for over a century. Okay, next slide is, so to wrap up, many different lines of evidence converge on the result, on the thesis that life is cosmic. From genetics, we have fragments of genes that have been inserted over long evolutionary timescales. We have evidence from cosmic dust. We have evidence from geology, the oldest evidence of life being at the time of comet impacts. We have evidence from meteorites. I haven't gone into that, but there are fossil structures in meteorites that have been discovered recently, evidence from comets, and evidence from diseases, even the incidence of the coronavirus. But there's an alarming trend to devalue or ignore new data that is culturally inadmissible, with the aim of extending the lease of what I would call an ailing, geocentric paradigm of Earth-centered life. This poses an immediate danger, not just for science, but for the well-being of humanity as a whole. In 2021, the Earth-centered theory, Aristotelian theory of spontaneous generation, this is a bandwagon that's been followed for many years, is really close to falling over the cliff. Dawn of a new paradigm is overdue. Thank you. Sorry, I overran by a few minutes, but...
Not at all. I mean, what a fascinating talk, Professor Wickramasinghe. It's been absolutely exciting, and it's actually sort of continuing a whole series of talks because we had one on Oumuamua just on Sunday, and Professor Charles Cockell from Royal Observatory was actually doing a talk at Sigma, Moray Astronomy Club, just past Friday, which is also part of the Science Festival, and he mentioned his experiment. Actually, this is something that one of our audience, Richard Oakley, has sort of reminded us that he's sort of mentioned his experiments where he put coated plates with microbes on the outside of the International Space Station, and they have survived the space environment. So clearly, life can survive in space. Loads of questions from our audience, so I'll try and put as many of them across to yourself as possible. But you can comment on Charles's work. I mean, because you're very.
I admire his work greatly, but I think it's he still sort of stops short of assigning this to a cosmic life as being a cosmic phenomenon. Survival of life is what he has demonstrated really quite beautifully. Survival of life under extreme conditions, and what I think that proves is that life itself is a truly cosmic phenomenon. It's not that life coming out from a planet can survive and reach the next neighboring planet. That happens, but that's a relatively trivial process in terms of the bigger picture.
Indeed. Now, one of the questions one by many of the listeners is this idea about, we are kind of looking mainly for carbon-based life. Would you also consider that the cosmic life prevalence might have also different facets to it, as it were, and that it happens here, we've got carbon life, but are there, you think, potentially also other forms of life we're not as attuned to just yet to understand elsewhere?
Well, I think we can make any speculation that we wish, but on the basis of evidence that we have, I think the only evidence we have of the life process relates to carbon-based life, and so I have stayed clear of exploring or discussing that because the evidence does not exist, and we can make any hypothesis we like. But it's in my reckoning, it's wise to stick to hard data and hard evidence. And the evidence from organic life, from carbon-based life on the Earth is just crushing at the moment. There's no doubt in my mind that in the fullness of time, maybe within this coming decade, the acceptance that life is everywhere a truly cosmic phenomenon, carbon-based life, that is, and that there is a virus, bacterial, cosmic microbiome. And as was indicated in some of the news reports of the last couple of days, the intimate connection between viruses and cells on the Earth is well established, right? We have a microbiome in our bodies that contain viruses and bacteria, and they play a huge role, not only in our metabolism, but also in the long process of evolution that we see. Our ancestry line is full of these bits and pieces of viruses that were inserted into our genomes. So that data is secure in terms of experimentation, and so I would tend to think let's stick to the processes that we can reproduce in the laboratory and study on the Earth.
As expected, the theory that you just sort of mentioned, the idea that actually a lot of the viruses might perhaps come from space has kind of caused a lot of discussion on our YouTube live chat. And one particular question that I just wonder about your thoughts on it is the idea that viral pandemics often arise in single locations and then spread rather than kind of coming from all over the place. Is there a particular reason why that might be? Or
yeah, I mean that's the reason that we've explored that absolutely exhaustively in our books, and the reason that China seems to be the focus or the starting point of many pandemics, many viral pandemics, influenza, for instance. All the new variants of influenza or new pandemic strains start in China, is because of the nature of the Earth's atmosphere and the topology of the Earth's surface. The Himalayas are the tallest mountain range on the planet. They essentially puncture a hole into the troposphere. And so any viral material, we know that viral material is in the stratosphere. That has been amply demonstrated in the last 3 or 4 years, right? Rich et al., R-E-C-H-E et al., have published an exhaustive study of viruses that were collected on the tops of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And he reckons that I think there are millions of viruses falling from the inversion layer, atmospheric inversion layer. So most of these are sort of recycled from the ground, but there is certainly a component that is coming from space, is my view. So if that comes in through the atmosphere, if the new viruses come in through the atmosphere and get into the troposphere and form a reservoir in the jet streams and so on, the first place that would have a hole would puncture a hole is around China. So the fact that it starts in one place is not surprising. The subsequent fallout of a viral pandemic is also strongly indicative of a continuing input from the skies after the pandemic starts. Right? I'm not saying that the pandemic is not caused by or not contributed largely by person-to-person infection. That is certainly happening in COVID and happening in the influenza situation. But the appearance of new clusters mysteriously in various places, both in the influenza case and also now in the COVID situation, they're called mystery cases, where they cannot connect individual new clusters with pre-existing infections. All those, I think, to me, signals a process that is connected with an atmospheric injection. But I mean, these things have to be explored. I mean, I don't have the resources to explore them, and it's worth exploring them. I have published really quite provocative papers in peer-reviewed medical journals saying that the time has come for a surveillance system to be instituted in the stratosphere to warn us of impending pandemic strains of bacteria and or viruses. And these are published in MedCom and in various peer-reviewed journals, but they're not taken notice of because people think that this is just crazy.
So I think final question, which is a little bit more towards sort of the idea of do we always have the full picture? Because one of our viewers, Bill, sort of highlights that as well as bases A, C, T, and G in RNA and DNA, there's been recently discoveries of X and Y bases as well, which are. So is it possible that other bases might found, and that there's maybe even incompatible species of DNA that might exist in the universe? So there's some bases that actually don't necessarily commute with other bases, and so you create again another layer of variance potentially. I know I'm kind of stretching the evidence base here again. I'm just interested in your opinion.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think the chances of one successful system dominating is very attractive, and I think it is likely to be the case that one system dominates over all the others. But there's bound to be a variation that occurs across the billions of habitats that are around the world. And the universe is so vast that it can accommodate variations on a huge scale, isn't it? I mean, you could have minute variations, and the Earth takes up one variant, and they reject other variants. Maybe these other variants are coming in, but they don't lock into the genomes of pre-existing evolving lines, and so they go unnoticed.
Indeed. Well, that was absolutely horizon expanding and awe-inspiring and life affirming as well. So thank you so much, Professor Wickramasinghe. And thank you, of course, to our very diligent technical team for looking after us so well, and to everyone at home for joining us today. We have more explorations of the physics of energy, life, and time at 11:30 with a Time to Fade and a Time to Grow event. Of course, all details you can find on the Auckland International Science Science Festival website. In the meantime, if you are enjoying the festival, don't forget to like us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as follow our YouTube channel. And remember, tonight we are closing the Science Festival with a special Festival Ceilidh event. Starts at 8:30, and again, the link is on the website. But for now, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much, Professor Wickramasinghe, for being with us. And to everyone else, have a lovely morning and goodbye for now.
Thank you very much. Oh, thank you.